Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to my YouTube channel or my podcast. I'm your host and guide, Will Caminada, and I'm here to help you awaken, heal, and expand your consciousness. In today's episode, I will share with you my top 6 spiritual books that have impacted me, that have changed my life, and they've helped me during my spiritual awakening journey, my healing journey, and the expansion of my consciousness. I will share a little bit of what they're about, and then I'll share my biggest takeaway from each book. So if you haven't read any of these books, don't worry, I'm not gonna spoil everything for you. And if you've read any of these, let me know in the comments what has been your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast and follow me on Instagram at GuyWill, where I share exclusive daily content. All right, so let's get down to my top 6 spiritual books. Number 6, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Technically not necessarily a spiritual book. Elizabeth Gilbert is not considered a spiritual teacher. She is a spiritual teacher for me, and this book, Big Magic, has helped me so much in my creative process, in my creative journey. So first of all, this is a must read for anybody who consider themselves a creative person. Although I personally believe that we are all creative beings, we just have to tap into that divine creativity within each and every one of us. However, if you consider yourself an artist, someone who works and needs to be creative most of the time, whether you're a writer, a singer, an actor, content creator, an entrepreneur, this is a must read. And I love the fact that Elizabeth Gilbert approaches creativity from a more holistic perspective. So this is why I put this book in my top 6. My biggest takeaway from this book is that she talks about ideas as beings that are floating around and looking for a human collaborator, someone who will manifest that idea into reality, into our physical reality. She also says that we must be ready, we must be open, we must be literally awakened so that idea can cling on to you, can reach you, and you can work with it. And then she also says that if you don't work with it, if you don't work on it, then that idea might as well just leave you and find somebody else. The Bringers of the Dawn, Teachings from the Pleiadians by and through Barbara Marciniak. So I've done a series of a sort of book club on Insight Timer. I've just finished this week. Every week we talked about 1 or 2 chapters from this book. Teachings from the Pleiadians are so relevant for today's world, even though this book has been published in the 80s, late 80s actually. So in case you don't know, the Pleiadians are higher dimensional beings. I talk about them often here in the channel and in my podcasts because I work with them. And Barbara Marciniak, she specifically started channeling the Pleiadians. And so this book, The Bringers of the Dawn, is a channeled material. And when you read it, it's as if the Pleiadians were talking to you. And they bring so much wisdom because it is believed that they are the next step in our evolution. And right now, they are helping us into this 5D ascension. One of the things that people said in this series that I've done on Insight Timer, last week actually, someone said, I was a little bit reluctant to stay in this live talk to hear what you had to say about this book because you mentioned that the Pleiadians were aliens, so I was a little bit reluctant, but everything you're saying, everything that this book is sharing resonates with me deeply. And that is because it's a book from the Pleiadians to the human race. And they're not talking about what life is like in the Pleiades, in the higher dimensions. They're actually giving us tools and almost like a map for us to deal with this 3D experience, human experience. And the biggest takeaway for me is that this book is super relevant to today's world, like 2020, 2021. It's almost as a prophecy, really, because it was relevant then, but it's super relevant today. And I believe it will still be relevant for a few more years to come. But I hope and believe that at some point this book, these teachings from the Pleiadians, they will be sort of too obvious for us. And that's when I believe we will have achieved 5D ascension. So I highly recommend this book, even if you're not necessarily familiar or you don't feel a connection with the Pleiadians. Number 4 is Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, Living the Wisdom of the Tao by Dr. Wayne Dyer. I love Dr. Wayne Dyer. I'm a big fan. I love all of his books. It was difficult for me to pick one from him, so I recommend all of his books, but I picked this one because it's really changed my perspective. It's really helped me expand my consciousness. So technically, this is a book based on the teachings of the Tao by Lao Tzu, and it's an ancient text called Tao Te Ching. So what Dr. Wayne Dyer did, he studied all the translations from this book. He's done some research on this book, and this text actually has 81 verses. And so what Dr. Wayne did, he wrote his interpretation, and it's called Living the Wisdom of the Tao because at the end of each chapter, which is each verse, Dr. Wayne gives us some ideas, some tasks, even activities that we can do so that we can really embrace and live the wisdom of the Tao. At the end of each chapter, he has a section that says doing the Tao now. So each chapter has a verse, so you can read the verse and then you read Dr. Wayne's interpretation and the suggestion that he makes. And one more thing, it's a thick book, but the great thing about this book is that you don't have to read from beginning to end. And this book actually had been my companion for almost 2 years. And I would just open the book sometimes on a random page and I would read one of the verses. It was almost like an oracle card deck. It was always like a really powerful message. It was always what I needed to hear at that moment. And my biggest takeaway was when I was going through a period of rebirthing, and a lot of the dreams that I had when I was younger was sort of dying out. They didn't die necessarily in me, they just rebirthed into a more expanded version. I was living in LA then, that was 2018. I was kind of lost in terms of what my purpose was, and I came across this chapter. It's chapter 15. It's called Living an Unhurried Life, and one of the main taglines was stop chasing your dreams. And when I read that, I was just, my first reaction was like, how am I supposed to stop chasing my dreams? Like, dreams are everything for me. Like, I've lived my whole life pursuing my dreams, and that gave me meaning, that gave me purpose. But then I slept on it, I meditated on it for a while, and I understood what it meant. It is basically saying, allow yourself to just be and go with the flow of life. We spend too much time looking at the future and chasing something that we don't have here right now. Or even the idea of chasing, like the feeling of chasing is that of neediness, or that of like I need something, I'm looking for something, I'm running, like I'm running out of time kind of thing. So this was my biggest takeaway. It was really impactful for me at the time, and it was a time when I was learning on a deeper level what surrender meant. And so this takes me to book number 3, The Surrender Experiment by Michael A. Singer. So Michael A. Singer also wrote The Untethered Soul, which is an awesome book. But this book specifically, The Surrender Experiment, also changed my life. I read it at a time that I was figuring out what this surrendering and trusting thing means. And I remember I was living in London back then, had just finished my degree, and there were some issues with and restrictions with my visa, and I didn't really know what my future held. We don't ever know, do we? But I just remember I left London. I went to Thailand for a while, and that was like my action of surrender, because I really didn't plan much, and I was just trusting and surrendering and really trying to understand what that meant. When I went back to London after my stay in Thailand, which for me was the most epic moment of surrender in my life, I came across this book and then I read it, and for me it felt like I understood what this surrender thing means. Michael sort of set for himself this experiment that he calls the surrender experiment. So he decided that he was gonna do whatever life threw at him, whether he wanted to do it or not, whether he liked it or not, because essentially he says that surrendering is letting the ego aside and just keep going and trusting that flow of life, which I mentioned earlier. So that was my biggest takeaway, is that sometimes we will do things that we don't necessarily want to do, we as in our ego, and then we understand why we needed to do what we did. And secondly, sometimes we do things that we have no idea of why exactly we're taking that decision, or we're doing that activity, or we meeting that person, but that means you're following your intuition, and sometimes later in life, most times later in life, you understand why. So I highly recommend this book. Number 2, Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. Now this is one of my all-time favorite books. I love Anita Moorjani, and this book also has changed my life because it just confirmed all of that self-love practice, all of the spiritual practice that I was doing a few years ago. Essentially, Anita experienced an NDE, a near-death experience. She was considered dead. She was fighting, I believe, stage 4 or 5 cancer. She went to the hospital and the doctor said, she has no chance. So she describes in the book that she actually was considered dead, and she transitioned to another realm, and she made the decision to come back, and then in 5 months she recovered, and the doctors couldn't even explain. Obviously she talks in the book with more detail, and what I love about this book is just so relatable. It may sound like it's a little bit of a woo-woo, but it's not. It's just super relatable, and anyone can read this book. You can read it in a weekend because it's so good and so captivating, so engaging, and it has that ripple effect. Because I remember I gave this book as a gift to my teacher, to my tutor in the college that I was studying at, and he read it in a weekend, and he came back to me the following week, and he was like, "I love this book. It's everything I needed right now. How did you know that this is what I needed to hear?" And I also gave this book to my mom, Portuguese version, and she loved it. She started giving this book as gifts to her friends, to some of the family members. So it has that effect that you want to give it to somebody else. My biggest takeaway is that you can heal yourself, that you are love, and that you can heal yourself by loving yourself. Obviously, I'm putting into very simplistic terms, but essentially that's what she says. She says in the book, love yourself like your life depends on it, because it does. So I highly recommend this book. You can read it in a week or weekend. You're just gonna feel so hopeful, and you're gonna have a better idea of what a person goes through on an NDE, what she felt in the other side, in the other realm, and potentially you'll find more meaning in your life right now in the physical realm. And lastly, number 1, 9 Dimensions of Consciousness by Barbara Hand Clow. Now this is one of my favorite books, maybe my favorite book, and also this year I've done some live talks about it. I've been doing a lot of work around this book. Barbara Hand Clow also channeled the Pleiadians, so this is a channeled material from the Pleiadians as well. Slightly different from the Bringers of the Dawn, because here they're actually talking about the 9 dimensions of consciousness, what each dimension is, and how we can access these dimensions within ourselves. So when I read this book, well, first of all, there were a lot of synchronicities and messages while I was reading the book. I felt a connection with the Pleiadians by reading this book because I really felt that they were guiding me. The other thing that happened when I was reading this book, it was almost as if I could put all the pieces of the puzzle together. They give us a structure, 9 dimensions of consciousness. As I was reading the book, I was reflecting on my spiritual journey, on my spiritual path, and then in hindsight, I could tell, oh, okay, I was expanding my consciousness here. I was experiencing a 5D level of consciousness here. And so it just gave me that kind of structure. My biggest takeaway is that we are already multidimensional beings, and we need to start embracing our multidimensionality, and that the higher states of consciousness as well as the lower states of consciousness, it's all within us. They're all available for us right now. We don't have to wait anything. We don't have to go anywhere. They're all within us. So I highly, highly recommend this book. Again, even if you're not familiar with the Pleiadians, this book is super informative and it will change your life. Also, it may sound a little bit woo-woo because we're talking about higher dimensions of consciousness, aliens, but Barbara Hand-Clough actually has a scientific backup for each of these dimensions. So if you're interested in science, you're gonna love this book as well. And next year, 2022, I am planning on doing a program on the 9 dimensions of consciousness. Stay tuned, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast, and you'll hear more about the 9 dimensions of consciousness. So that's it, my top 6 spiritual books. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what has been your biggest takeaway from them. And if you haven't read any of these books or 1 or 2, let me know which ones you're most interested in getting. And if you want to order or get a copy of any of these books, you can take a look at the link in the description. And once again, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast in whatever platform you listen to this. Follow me on Instagram at GuyWill, and also follow me on Insight Timer. You can find me under my name, Will Caminada. And share this episode with that one friend who loves books. As always, keep shining your light, keep your heart open, and let love lead the way. I love you. See you in the next episode.